In the depths of the pandemic, a friend put me on to Darknet Diaries, a chart-topping podcast hosted by Jack Rhysider. This podcast is dark, talking about hackers, breaches, government activity, hacktivism, cybercrime, and everything that hides on the dark side of the internet. But how did Jack build this, starting from a side project to what is now his day job? It's a privilege to have Jack on episode 83 of Great Things with Great Tech. Hello and welcome to episode 83 of Great Things with Great Tech, the podcast highlighting companies doing great things with great technology. My name's Anthony Spiteri, and in this episode we're entering the dark side of the internet, into the world of cybersecurity storytelling with one of the most intriguing podcasts in the InfoSec community. Today though, we're not talking about a technology stack or a company, but rather one of the best podcasts that brings the dark corners of the internet and security into the light through real life stories, hacks, attacks, and the people behind them. That podcast is Darknet Diaries, and joining me today is one of the best storytellers on the internet, Jack Rhysider. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. Not as excited as I am to have you, believe me, but it's going to be great, and I've been looking forward to this for so long. But just before we get into the show, as a reminder, if you like great things with great tech and would like to feature in future episodes, please click on the link on the show notes, head to the podcast platforms, all hosted and distributed by Spotify podcasts and YouTube as well. Hit the like and subscribe button, all that kind of stuff that we do say at the beginning of the show. So with that quickly out of the way, Jack, firstly, again, thanks for being on. But it was interesting when I got you because I thought, how am I going to actually structure this? Do I change the format of the show, or do we just treat the Darknet Diaries as a company and give your background, the origin story? And that's definitely what I want to do. So firstly, just introduce yourself and give a little bit of a background as to who Jack was before Darknet Diaries.
Yeah, I'm Jack Rhysider. I make the podcast Darknet Diaries, which at this point has roughly like 600,000, 800,000 downloads per episode. And it's my full-time job, and I'm doing very well with it. And so how did I get here? I went to, university to get a degree in computer engineering, and from there became a network engineer and then security engineer. And I was eventually really fascinated by podcasts and wanted there to be a podcast that had this great level of storytelling, but talked about cybersecurity in ways of like, a big breach or someone breaking into something. It's high drama. It's exciting. There's some stuff going on there, and it doesn't need to be Hollywood fakeness or invented. There's some really cool stories that are real, and I want those documented, and I want those told in a very exciting way with a lot of music and high production, and try to get the people who were there on the show to tell me what happened. And so that's what the show is, and that's what I make.
Yeah, and you completely nailed that. And even from the first episode, I went back and listened to the first episode, and you nailed the introduction and the music from the start. And actually, it was funny because I think as podcasts start, usually if you listen to episode 1 versus 20 versus 100, they evolve and change a fair bit in terms of structure and the way that they're actually laid out and the music and whatnot. But you kind of nailed it from the start. How did you, but more importantly, what was there any particular incident that happened in your professional career where you went, holy crap, that's awesome, or that's amazing in a negative way, because obviously this world of cybersecurity isn't great for the people getting hacked or the people that are on the other side of it. But there was one particular incident where you went, I can make a show out of this.
Well, it wasn't so much like that, but it was more of not being able to get the people in my department to budge. And I'm like, there's some crazy stuff happening. We really need to take security seriously. And they're just kind of yawning, falling asleep, or even going so far as to say, I don't think a breach to our company would be that big of a deal. And I was just like, I've failed you in every level of trying to convince you how important this is, right? So how do I convince someone else's manager to approve that budget, to get that? And that is kind of what I have in my head as I'm writing certain episodes of like how important this is to your business to have a good security policy or whatever the case is. And I think maybe there's something there that falls in line for what you're asking.
Yeah, and I think like fast forward today, like even now in what I do, like I've kind of shifted my narrative when I'm talking to, CXXs and business owners to try and scare the shit out of them, to try and make them aware that if you do have an incident, if you get attacked and you can't recover, in the case of, where we play the game at Veeam, I want to make them aware that this is like your livelihood, not just for the company, not just for, the revenue or the brand reputation, but also for you, like food on your table. So I think it's interesting that you said that, because I think what we're still trying to do today is we're trying to scare these guys to make sure they take this seriously.
Yeah. And I think another thing that kind of has got me going early on was, being part of the cybersecurity space as a security engineer. I wanted to get something going. I wanted to be like an engineer or not an engineer, but like an entrepreneur or some online business. And I was throwing a lot of things at the wall trying. And somebody told me at a conference that if you can explain complex things simply, there is some money there. Or, and I was just like, what does that mean? Like, I can explain things as clear as I possibly can, but it still is just my manager I'm talking to or my customers. Where's the extra money? And I think that is one of the things that kind of allowed me to split off and do what I do, because having that ability to explain some of these really difficult things in a way, in maybe layman's terms or in a way that
Yeah.
anyone can understand, is really interesting. And I also sprinkle it in with that extra bit of, okay, well, if you know this, then maybe you want to learn this next thing or something. So I still even provide something for somebody who already knows it to learn something more. So it's not like I'm dumbing it down to a fifth grader level. I'm
Mm.
speaking to you as an adult, but I'm also adding even more in there. And I think there's something really unique about that I was able to learn over time. And one of the things that I got good at was, or how I learned it was, before starting the podcast, I was blogging for about 7 years.
Yeah.
And this was where I would just kind of take some lessons learned from work or an error code or something, and I'd be like, okay, there's no there's no Google information about how to solve this error.
Yeah.
I've got to figure it out on my own. And so I would just be like, okay, here's what I figured out what to do when you hit this error. And so it's just kind of like self notes, and this became like, well, how do I explain this like problem, and then and just get to the answer as quickly as we can, and not overcomplicating the situation or make, and when you're troubleshooting something, you really want to isolate the issue as well. And so,
Yeah.
can I isolate this problem? Can I reproduce it? And so I was going through these steps of, this is a really complex problem, but if you can isolate it to here, it becomes much more simple. And here's how you can do it. And so years and years and years of just trying to explain things to the internet. Here's how to do this complicated thing as simple as you can, is what kind of gave me that skill level to then do it in a podcast form. I'd be like, I've been explaining this concept for years. I can explain it here as well.
And absolutely you do that. And I think that's one of the things that lured me to the show, is when you kind of explain what is in theory a fairly complex way to, say, breach a network, right, through the firewalls, through the front end, and then how they move laterally through, Windows vulnerabilities or Linux vulnerabilities, whatever it might be. But you explain that in a really, you said it in a layman's way, without making it sound, too simple. So from my perspective, being a guy who's worked in the industry, as I have, and was blogging as well, and to your point, my blogs early on were all about from problems that I had in my line of work, and then looking up and saying, hey, actually, no one's talked about that. Let's now create something where someone can actually improve or learn themselves. So it's almost like creating from learning, or learning by doing. But your success in the show, I think, from my perspective, is being able to talk about some topics that people relate to in a way that is exciting, through a story, using great character building. But then there's still the awesomeness of the technology that underpins it as well. You still talk about the tech, and that's what I love about the show.
Yeah, I love technology too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't be in this business if we weren't doing it. That's for sure. So, hey,
Hmm.
so you founded the Darknet Diaries. It started in 2017, but you were still kind of working at that time. So, how did you balance that out initially in terms of working full time and then doing a podcast, and then seeing it sort of slowly but surely gain momentum and take off?
Yeah, and I mean, you were also mentioning, like, go back to episode one, what that was some. it sounded, you were telling me there was some craft and skill there, and I think what was going on in those early days is I really wanted to hear a show like this where I wanted a really nice storytelling way of telling me the cybersecurity news, right? So it's like true crime meets
Yeah.
cybercrime. And I think a lot of cutting edge news is leaves us with the more questions and answers. We don't know who did it or what was impacted and all these kind of things. And so you just kind of walk out of that article without really knowing much more. But I'm kind of a slow news junkie. So I'm like, wait, let's wait 4 years, 6 years for all the pieces to fall on the floor, and then I'll pick all that up and I'll finally tell the story, soup to nuts, right? We have the beginning, middle, and end of this whole story. The person even goes to prison in the end, and it's all wrapped up with a bow, right? And those are the stories I'm looking for and I love because it really provides this really wonderful trail to go through and find why someone did it and all this sort of thing. So I was looking for that didn't exist, and that's why I made it so that I could hear it, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the whole beginning of it. And then when I was like, oh, okay, I didn't really want to make it, but I was like, oh crap, I think I'm gonna have to make this because there's no one else making it, and I really want it, and I love podcasts, so I might as well go for it. And so I had the cybersecurity knowledge. I could explain things, but I didn't have the storytelling aspect figured out. And so
Interesting.
that was something that I knew I had to focus on, right? I think a lot of podcasters are like, well, how do I podcast? What mic do I get? And where do I host the files? And how do I make an RSS feed and all this sort of thing? And to me, none of that was on my radar to begin with. It was all about how do I make such a good, compelling thing to listen to? And I really don't care about the mechanics of it. That I'm sure I could
Yeah.
figure out in a few hours or a weekend.
Hmm.
It's really putting in the content that's the most important. So this is where I dived into who are the great storytellers that I looked up to? And this was Ira Glass from This American Life, Roman Mars from 99% Invisible, Jad Abumrad from Radiolab, even going back further, Rod Serling from Twilight Zone, or um,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
there is even some other radio shows that I remember from when I was a kid. Paul Harvey, I thought was a great storyteller. And so I was going back and like, okay, what are the tricks that these people are doing to do great storytelling? And they've done interviews, they've spoken on stage, whatever the case is. There was a book that a lot of them have been involved with called Out on the Wire, and I read the book, and it was very interesting on how to tell a story, right? So this was a craft and an art that I really needed to get good at. And so starting in episode one, I had probably read 2 or 3 books on just the art of storytelling before even picking up the microphone for the first time, right? So I wasn't even
Okay.
like concerned about any of the logistics until I felt like I could do something. And still, when I was ready to start on the first one, I had no idea. But what I just decided to do was copy. It was like, okay, here is the exact formula that these other greats are using. And I've heard them
Yeah.
so many times that I'm like, I know the cadence of their voice. I understand when they flip in and out of audio from a guest and when they narrate and when the music comes in. And so I'm just going to basically take one of their episodes and try to take the structure and put in my show. Like talk the way they talk, do the cadence the way they would, everything just exactly like if I could be them, but write this story instead, how would they do it,
Yeah.
right? And so it was
Yeah.
really this copycat version of making it, and I think that's the kind of the shoulders I stood on. Was you said it was sounded good. Episode one sounded good. Well, it's
Yeah.
because I did everything I could to copy it, and then to kind of finish up this point is I copied over and over. I copied all my favorites that I liked, right? So it was okay. I tried Ira Glass, then I tried Roman Mars, then I tried Jad Abumrad, then I tried Malcolm Gladwell and all these other people that I thought. Aaron Mahnke was another influence of mine. And I was just like, I'm gonna try each one of their styles. And then after I tried, 20 different styles with different people, that's when I finally developed my own voice and I had my own
Okay.
comfort level and I took
Yeah.
off in my own direction. And so it
Yeah.
was really those first 20, 30, 40 episodes were really just me going to school and learning it and practicing it the way that they've done it before discovering how my style is. And it's really a unique blend of it all. And it is unique at this point. I feel like
Yeah.
I do something
Absolutely.
different than others.
You absolutely do. I haven't found anyone yet that does how you do it and the way that you construct the story. I was gonna actually say, walking on the shoulder of giants, we all kind of do that in a way, don't we? Where we look at our heroes, whether it be sport, whether it be in business, whatever it might be, and we just build on people's success and what they do.
Hmm.
If there was, do you think that you are just a hash pot of all of those people, or do you feel there was one particular one that you are more like than any other?
Ooh, at this point, I think it's a mashed pot of it all. I don't think that anyone. I really went through phases to really try to be like one, and then
Yeah,
I just kind of took my favorite pieces and said, nope, I'm gonna. I mean, some of that stuff was just so complex, like Radiolab, for instance, is very high paced and almost manic in their
yeah,
delivery, and I just can't keep up that system. And some other shows were just so well done as far as journalism goes, interviewing
yeah.
5, 10, 20 guests just for one episode. And I'm just like, I can't get that many people. I'm just one person here making a show, right? So it's just so complex. But I would do that for one episode just to see what that's like to
Mm.
have 4 guests in one episode and put all their voices together to make one narrative arc. And that was amazing. But I don't know if I'll ever get there again because that took almost a year to create that episode, right? So
There you go.
so
Yeah,
it's
that's a long time
it's
between podcasts.
yeah, there's goals and then there's just okay, I can't ever get there. I'm just gonna let that one go in the dust.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, listening to that progression, you've definitely have refined, a lot of the delivery as well. So it's not to say that you haven't, you've actually definitely refined this and work, because we're all learning as we move ahead, right? And as we get along. It's funny that I think that I've probably purposefully or otherwise copied certain aspects of what you do as well. Almost, this isn't a storytelling podcast, right? So this is a conversational interviewing type
Hmm.
of scenario. But I've been playing with the start of the episode to try and get that hook. And I love that the way that you tell almost like a random story that's not connected to the actual podcast. I know you weren't doing that it's not every episode, right? But I love that way that you actually just change it up. It's a completely different story. It's personalized, and you jump into something different. But the way that you change your voice and the way that you manipulate your voice as your tool, like
Mm.
that's actually very, very unique and very strong. And I think that's where you succeed pretty well. And then obviously the moods that you put into it, the music, I mean, that's something that lots of people can't really achieve that. So yeah, you've done that research. So just in terms of 2017, and then I believe you went kind of like full time in 2019. So
Mhm.
that transition from thinking, okay, I've got a side gig, it's working pretty well. I love it. I love what I'm doing. It's making a little bit of money, I suppose, through sponsorship or whatever. But how do you make that actual decision to go all in and go, right now, day job's done. This side gig is now my full time job.
Yeah, I think I had so the story is actually that I had some Bitcoin that I bought. I had a book Bitcoin that I bought at $600, and I was like, thought that
Decent.
was very risky back then when I bought it for that much. But 2018 comes around, it's at what, 10,000, $20,000 for that Bitcoin. So
Mm,
I was like, I'm going to sell this Bitcoin. This will give me like 3 months of spending cash, and
yeah.
I can quit my job and I could see if I can make some money in this time, right? So that was the goal, is give myself 3 month break from work. So I quit my job. They're like, well, what do you have lined up? I'm like, nothing. Uh, and I just got my Bitcoin I'm cashing out here. And so I cashed out the Bitcoin and took that 3 months of, okay, let's see if I can make some ramen money by the end of this, right? Just a little bit of scrap to, because I
Yeah.
know that in this world is this with the leverage of having technology on our side, if you can make a penny, that is such a big step out of making nothing, right? So then if you
Yeah.
can make a penny, maybe how do you make 2 pennies and how do you make $1? And so you just kind of keep scaling it up, and you can with that leverage. You can grow the audience, you can make bigger deals, you can add more ads in, whatever the case is. But really just getting into that first, okay, I'm making a little bit is a big deal. And so could I get to that stage by the end of 3 months? That was kind of the rush. And yeah, I did quite a bit of marketing and podcasting in that time. Like it was a full-time focus. I want to
Yeah.
make it right. This is my
Yeah.
big chance at making something. Because by that point, there were people. Maybe I had a few thousand listeners, but they were very excited about they were loving it, right? And when you have this passionate audience, you know you're onto something, because it's not just like, oh, we kind of like it or whatever. It's, no, this is amazing. I can't
Waiting
wait to
for the
hear.
episodes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what gave me the fuel. That was kind of an unexpected thing too. It was like, of all the rewards you thought you might get from this, it really is just the passion from the audience who loves it, gives you this energy that you just never expected. And it takes you places that you just didn't think you could ever get to. Because, like I said, I thought I was making it for myself, but now there's all these other people that like it. I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is kind of exciting. And so, yeah, by the end of 3 months, I was making, I think, my first ad deal, which was not that much, a few $100s,
Yeah.
but it was enough to, get me to one more month, which was,
Yeah.
now I'm making a few hundred more or whatever, right? And so I was able to get through that dip, as I like to call it, of your thing is just losing money, losing money, losing money. If you can get through it and then start rising up on the other end, then you've just got blue sky that you can go up to.
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, selling a Bitcoin back then, did you have any regrets about? I mean, 600 to 20 grand, that's a pretty good return on
Well,
investment regardless, right? But do you
yeah.
kind of look back at it and go, oh, maybe I could have held on to that and maybe leveraged something else a little bit?
No, not at all, because I didn't have enough Bitcoin for a Lamborghini, which was is always the joke in crypto
Yeah,
land
yeah,
of
yeah,
like, you got
yeah,
Lambo money. But
yeah.
no, but this it did change my life, right? It gave me
There you
this
go.
runway to zoom off of and launch a whole new career, and it's absolutely changed my life going in this direction, making this podcast.
Yeah. And as a company now, I mean, focusing on the show about great things with great tech, building on the podcasting boom. Obviously, you hit a pretty good sweet spot there with the
That's
pandemic
right.
and everything that kind of came in there, and you've ridden that wave. I don't, it's not a bubble; it's definitely a wave, right? It'll continue to
Hmm.
grow. Um, how do you? I mean, now you've got production. You're definitely high quality. You can see you've got graphics people that do a lot of your artwork and whatnot. So it's turned into this. Is it a company? Would you call it, or is it still
Hmm.
just a little enterprise? Like, or do you consider it to be a company?
Oh, sure. I'd say it's a company. I think 100%. Yeah, it's a company that I've got multiple people that work with it and for me, and yeah, I think of it as a business.
Yeah. And then just a sort of question that's probably a little bit interesting. Like, do you think you can do it forever? Like, what's what, because I think from a career perspective, we all kind of have career goals that we set. And if you asked me what I'd be doing in 5 years, I probably couldn't answer that now. But what do you think? Like, it's a question I probably would ask at the end usually. But how do you see it? How do you see it going down?
Yeah, so I mean, I think early on as an entrepreneur, what I wanted to do was create a SaaS product, right? So this is something where I could charge a monthly fee to my users, and
Yeah.
this like never update it, and it's like, here's your service
I'm
you
trying to
get,
do that
and
right now. I've got two on the fly. Maybe they go off, but
yeah,
yeah. So I know
because
that feeling.
then I could just, wash my hands and be like, cool, I got this product. I just need to do, tech support for it. And I don't have to like keep developing it. And I
Yep.
could go to the beach and, work from there. And instead I have this thing where every single time I hit publish, I've got to just start from scratch. And yes, I've got the momentum of like the audience behind me, but I still, every episode is brand new. And so I have to find a new story and write a whole thing and find the people to interview and all this kind of stuff. So it's a never ending work. And so you're asking if I could do that forever. No, because it's exhausting. It's absolutely
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long I have it in me, but I do have a lot of great ideas that I'd like to use what I have to bounce off the next thing. And I think,
Build up again. Yeah.
yeah, I think, taking what, I had that blog for 7 years before starting the podcast, and I was able to put banners all over that blog saying, hey, please listen to
Yeah.
my podcast. And I was getting a few
Oh,
clicks
that's
every
awesome.
day from people going there to say, oh, let's check out this podcast. Right. And so if I do start something new, I have this big audience that I could try to take to the next thing. And I think anyone who's creating anything online should be aware of that, of
Yeah.
you're probably not this is probably not the first thing you've created, whatever you're working on. And you should probably look at who was looking at that last thing you created and see if you can move them over to this. And if we get somebody here, keep them so that you can move them on to the next thing that you create, because they
Yeah.
probably like you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like you've hit a point there about distribution and network effects, right? Like the Seven Powers. I listened to the Acquired podcast, not more so recently, but I was big into them when they started. but they talk about the seven powers in business, and one of those is distribution, the other one is network effects, and you've got both here effectively through the reach and brand power that you have built up. So yeah, you can do anything now because you've got this following. So as long as it's still obviously, as long as it's still interesting to those people, right? You can't go and start a food truck as an example and say, hey, come to my food truck. I mean, that might not get the audience that you're after. I'm not sure why I went to food truck, but yeah.
It is surprising because you've got other podcasters like Sam Harris who started a meditation app. And I think Jay Shetty, who is a podcaster, started a meditation app, and Jocko Willink started a pants company. And it's like, well, this doesn't quite track in my head of why these people are starting these alternate apps and doing all these other businesses or whatever, right? Oh, look at Mr. Beast. He's put a chocolate bar out.
Chocolates.
And so I think it might work that food truck could work. You never know in this world.
Have you tasted those chocolates? Because I have, and my kids have, and they're like, well, yeah, it's not that. It's Mr. Beast, but it's not that good. So it's like I don't want to dish Mr. Beast live on the internet, but man, I don't know about that chocolate thing. But that's absolutely him using his network effects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he also started a virtual hamburger store. So it's quite
and that's
wild.
Done well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there you go. So who knows? You could do Jack Rhysider's burgers or something moving forward. Hey, let's dive into a little bit more of. I think it's a good segue into the guests and the structure of the show, and it's because let's be honest, it's not called the Darknet Diaries for fun, right? Like you actually dive into some very serious and dark places that sometimes it's very hard to listen to, right? And the subject matter is confronting. How do you deal with that? Because I feel like it might put a lot of pressure on you, especially when you're doing the research for the show. Like, how do you kind of step aside from the subject matter that you're actually researching sometimes to be able to produce the show?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to take it personally or put too much judgment on people that I have, and just be like wanting to tell their story and let it just kind of be out there on its own. But I do think about, I don't know, maybe I have a tough time even grasping some of the negative consequences of some of these things, and so I just kind of leave it there without going deep. Yeah, I mean, there's that funny quote that I use all the time, which is like, either you die a hero or you become a villain, right? I'm like, now that I've interviewed all these people, I know all the tricks for Bitcoin laundering and scamming and ransomware and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, you know what? I bet I could get away with all this now that I know how everyone gets caught and all this kind of stuff. So I do think about that sometimes. And I think in the last, I don't know, year, I may have become more ranty in some of the things that I've been saying too, like, oh, this really ticks me off because of this or whatever. And I've had to pull some of that back and just yank it right out of the episode because it just gets too much. And so I do try to, I think just in general, I try to take my third opinion on a lot of things, right? So if my first knee-jerk reaction is, this is bad, I then take a walk and I say, hold on, wait, is it cool? What am I not thinking about here? Okay, so there's another aspect here that might not be so bad if they had done it this way. And then I wait for like a third idea to pop in my head. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm feeling more calm and I'm feeling more rational, and we could look at it on this angle. And if I start to balance it out in my head, I start to just give it more space and allow it to have its own freedom, I suppose. And I don't know. That's some of the ways that I just look at some of those controversial topics as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say you feel like you've got a bit more ranty. I definitely picked up on that in Jim Hates Scams episode. You definitely went on a small tangent there where you got angry, like pissed. I think you even said it pisses me off, right, that this happens. So I've seen that come out a little bit, but I think it's also natural, but it's good to be that way because, this, like I sort of alluded to at the start, these are people's lives are getting impacted directly with these sorts of scams and crypto thefts and, company attacks. So you're rightful to be angry at these things because we all should be, right? That people are so nasty that they want to try and scam people out of their life savings or ruin their lives through, putting pictures of pornography online or whatever it might be. So I feel like it's kind of natural that you do feel that way. So I kind of enjoy when you do that a little bit, but I get that you have to be a little bit balanced by it because sometimes you are interviewing someone who's spent a bit of time in prison for for certain things that they've done, and you don't want to, I guess, seem like you don't like these people or distrust them because of their past indiscretions because you're having a conversation with them in the now. And a lot of the people that you have on are reformed, right? And I think that's quite interesting that you have these criminals who are now reformed. Who was the guy? Was it Brett Johnson?
Hmm.
Gollum Fun? Like,
Yeah.
I think that was over 2 episodes. And
Hmm.
that's one of my favorite episodes because he was so raw and real, talking
Yeah.
about, his wife and his divorce and hooking up with a stripper, and the emotion that he went through was crazy. But then at the bottom of it, there was this technical discussion about him, basically scamming and being a launderer. Well, actually, what did he did? What was his thing?
Yeah, he did
Um,
IRS,
that's the
submitted
one,
IRS
IRS.
claims for other people and took their money.
Easy money, right? Like, great. And to your point, like I sat there thinking about that, going, man, could we do this? I wonder how many people on your show think that. Like, I've learned a little bit here. Maybe I'll try it to
Well,
that
I
point.
haven't
But
had, as far as I know, people haven't come to me and said, "Oh, I'm really, inspired to go and do crime because of your show." But I have had the hundreds of people come to me and say, "I'm really inspired to go into a career of cybersecurity, and I just got my first job or passed my
that's
first
awesome.
certificate or whatever." And I think that is really an interesting place to kind of try to work with, right? If you look at like a lot of educators online, they're they're teaching things that are easily taught, right? Here's something that's written in a textbook and I can teach you and
Yep.
that sort of thing. I think inspiring people to get excited about something is not easily taught. You can't just read a book on how to do that. And so I think that there's something just magical about that too. And I feel like I'm playing around with people's chemicals in their brains in a lot of the way that I do the storytelling. And this is something, as I was learning about storytelling, this is something I took a lot of serious consideration of. It's like, okay, how do you trigger oxytocin? How do you trigger serotonin? How do you trigger dopamine?
Mm.
How do you trigger endorphins in a brain? And what do those things feel like when you have the effects of these chemicals? And there are storytelling techniques that can absolutely do all that. And that is interesting because then it's getting you motivated and excited and feeling profound about certain things and you feel smart about understanding certain things because of the way I lay it out for you. And there's something just magical about getting the new generation involved with this as well. I love being able to reach the younger audience
Yeah.
because if like they're going to grow up appreciating what I've done and to be able to have that connection with just the young crowd is just so magical and special because they're the next, they're the future.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to reach them because they're off in their own, frequency. It's really difficult to pierce their
Massively, man.
bubble. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I realized that I'm just old. When I play cricket, and I've got some cricket bats there that you can see at the background, and it's a team game, right? And we play with people that I could be. I'm 45 now. I could play with a 15-year-old, right? Massive spread. And at a certain point, a couple of years ago, guys were getting onto Snapchat, and I was like, "Oh, I'm not on Snapchat." And then one of the dudes turned around and said, "Well, that's because you're old." And that was
Hmm.
that was my realization where I'm like, maybe I have to stop trying to connect with this generation and just accept for what I am, and that's offer a different type of experience to them, and not try and be on their level, right? Because they are so different. So if you're able to bridge that gap through the podcast and inspire people to get into this very, very important part of of the world, and it's going to be even more important moving forward, and we'll finish on the threat landscape a little bit later on. That's a good thing as well. Um,
But it's
I
also a
was just,
two-way
yeah,
street, right? So
yeah,
now that I am on their radar and they respect and appreciate me, I can hear from their stories, right? And so now I'm hearing about
mhm.
things that I would never have expected because,
Yeah,
me
two
growing
way.
up, I grew up in IRC and I grew up, we would do things on the Pirate Bay and then Anonymous showed up on the scene and all this
Yeah,
kind of thing. But what are the kids doing now? I don't know. And so it's really
I,
nice to
I
have
don't
this
know.
connection with them to get that ear on the tracks and say, what is the hot thing? What's going on? And it's crazy, some of the stuff. I
That's
mean, one of
awesome.
my most downloaded episodes is called Dirty Comms, and it's about
Yeah.
teenagers who are stealing crypto and scamming people in crypto. and stealing Robux. And I'm like, what in the world is Robux? And so it's
Oh
just a
yeah,
wild, it's a wild thing to see these teenagers making scam websites specifically for kids who get a gift card on Christmas morning. And they're
they're
like, oh,
so good at it.
we want to steal the kid's gift card, other 15-year-olds. And it's just,
And
it's so crazy.
it is. And hopefully these kids are the ones that actually write themselves and become the entrepreneurs of the future, right? Rather than going
Yes.
down the path of starting Revel or some sort of, ransomware company, which a lot of them kind of do as well, right? But you made a really interesting point. It triggered me a bit. So my son's a massive into Minecraft, right? He plays it he plays it too much. I'll just be honest with you. Um,
Okay.
but he came to me and he said, "Dad, this guy's cheating." And I'm like, "Is a cheater? Is an admin and is cheating?" I go, "Man, like, it can't happen in gaming. Like, sure, there's bugs and stuff, but the developers wouldn't allow the cheating in the games because that's just not cool, right?" And then I listened to your player cheater dev spy episode, which goes into the ins and outs of being able to literally buy cheats for games
Mm.
and do some crazy things where they can see through walls or get power ups, but it's like they're playing in a different reality of the game versus what other people are playing, so they're able to cheat. That blew my mind. And then I was able to go back to my son and say, yeah, you're actually right. And I believe you now. Where before I was like, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I do see that sometimes too, is where people were able to connect with the kid in a true way because they're like, I didn't know the kids were doing that these days. I mean, that one was
No.
really the thing that surprised me there is I knew there were cheats in games, but there were
Yep.
cheats that are streamable cheats, which means the people who are
Yes.
watching your stream don't see the cheats that you see. They see the real version of what the
Yes.
game sees, and then only you as a person on your side of the screen can see the cheats. And so people don't think you're cheating even though you're doing it live on stream.
That blew my mind. And to your point, there's money in that because if they're a Twitch streamer or whatever, there's money in that. So if they can be an awesome at the game, and that's why they do it. And that's, I think, fundamentally, if you look at the psyche of humans, all humans, whether playing games or in business, some people just want to find a way to get ahead and to make money, right? And I think that's a really good example of it. It's kind of like just inbuilt into our human nature, unfortunately, to try and take those shortcuts, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think, since this is great things with tech, I'd like to just add in here that I don't like to become a fossil when it comes to tech. And I
Yeah.
thought I was going in that direction where I wasn't really refreshing my an understanding of technology and this sort of thing. And I even thought, okay, whenever we get rid of the keyboard, that's going to be the last of me because I can't handle this like wave your hand or
Oh
whistle
yeah.
a certain thing in
Yep.
order to communicate with this computer. I need to be able to type on a keyboard. And in fact, give me a mouse. I can't even like go with a trackpad. Like everything was just, I don't want to like leave that. But I realized that I'm going to be left in the dust there. And I want to do the exact opposite. When something is weird or cringy online, or I don't understand it, that's the stuff I want to lean into. And especially when it's tech related. One of the latest that I can just recall is NFTs, right? That was weird.
Yep.
That didn't make any sense. I was like, no way, this is the dumbest thing. And then I was like, I need to buy this because I don't understand it. I want to
Yep.
understand this. And that brought me into such a world that not only introduced me to a whole new bunch of security concepts and a whole new group of community and stuff like that, but it also brought me like so many more stories for the episode because people are stealing and hacking and doing all kinds of social
Yeah.
engineering around these NFTs and making tons of money. And then there's this whole world of just cyber criminals in the NFT space. And I'm just like, holy cow. And they're making millions and millions and millions. And so I wouldn't have understood any of that and just thought it was like, oh, that's just weird. That's just what kids are doing. And I'm not going to be part of that. But because I'm ducking into all these places that don't make sense to me. And it is awkward. It is weird because I do feel like the old fossil a lot of times at these tech conferences and stuff where I don't know what anybody's talking about, but I really want to, and I lean in and I try to in order to stay fresh, and I want to always keep that freshness. And in fact,
Yeah.
people ask me like, "What phone or operating system you use?" I use it all. I use Linux and Windows and Mac, and I just keep cycling through it, and I don't stop there. I use Android and iPhone, and and all these other operating systems that I can just start switching it up. And I try not to even stay stuck on one programming language. If I make something with a
Yep.
programming language, I'll then say, okay, that's cool. Now I'll try a new programming language. And I just want to always be relevant
Always be
in,
learning.
yeah, always be learning and not be stuck in any sort of technology. And that's just kind of my ethos going forward with into the future as well.
And to a certain extent, what you're doing there, and then if you reproduce that, understand that knowledge in the show, you're actually helping guys like me as well learn as well. I love talking to people on the show because I learn stuff about the technology that they're creating. That's part of why I love doing it, because I'm learning as I'm going as well, speaking to way smarter people than I am to understand what they're doing with technology better. And then also to your point, just being able to learn a little bit. I'm petrified of being stagnant and not understanding the technology as I go forward. As a technologist myself, am I going to reach a point where to your worry, do I stand still and that's it? And then all of a sudden, I just have to give it up. I think we all have to make that decision though, as we go through our careers. Like, at what point are we comfortable with not knowing everything and just being comfortable with what we know, but still being understanding of the technology at a superficial level?
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun to keep learning, I think. And I think, if I had a message for younger crowd, it would be, don't get stuck in any technology. Can understand that this is a stepping point to the next technology that hasn't come out yet. And you can use your skill from what you have here to get to the next rung, and don't get stuck on this rung.
Yeah. All right. I wanted to talk just about a concept or an interesting thing that happens to me when I'm listening to podcasts. So I've written a list of my favorite episodes of Darknet Diaries. And what's really interesting is that I can place myself specific. So here's my thing about podcasts. I consume podcasts as I'm walking or doing a run, right? Outside. I can't consume them while I'm on my computer, while I'm doing gym work. If I'm on a plane, I can't consume them. I've got a very particular place where I actually get the most out of podcasts, and that's on my run and my walks. So what's really interesting though, I'm looking at the Kick episode, which, to be fair, that Kick was probably one of your darker episodes. I'm not sure if you had one that you think was darker than that one because of the subject matter there, but I think it was because of the way you delivered it, the subject matter. I remember specifically almost to the street that I was walking on because I'd just come back from overseas. It was about May 2022. I hadn't had COVID yet. I went to Vegas for our first conference, got COVID on the way back, and I was isolating in a hotel. And I vividly remember getting out because I had to get out. And your show, like that episode, if I remember a certain line or a certain part of that show, I could tell you what street I was on. It's a really weird thing that I do, and I do it with most podcasts, but I think that way allows me to consume and I know that they're really sinking in at that point. So I know that the episodes are having a massive impact on me at that point, because if I can go back to a point in time where I'm walking, I can think about the content. That tells me that, number one, it's interesting. Number one, it's delivered. Number two, it's delivered really well. And number three, I'm learning. So I don't know if that's weird or anything, but
No, I do the same
that's
exact thing when I'm
yeah.
doing yard work and stuff. I'll walk past that bush later on, a month later, and I'll remember exactly what show I was listening
Yeah.
to when I was trimming that bush last time.
Okay, so maybe it's not just me. Maybe I'm not weird, and it's not
No,
just
it's
me,
I've heard
and
this from
more
a lot of
people do
people
it.
actually.
There you go. And I think the podcast genre is probably something that probably lends itself to that more than, say, this music or whatever, because it is superficial learning like you're sucking it in almost subconsciously at the same time while doing other things. It's a really interesting thing. I wanted to just ask you, just to round out the episodes, like if you had a favorite episode or a couple of favorite episodes, what would they be? I just want to mention as well, my favorite for sure is the duel that you did on the NSO and the Pegasus software. I found that just technically really interesting and scary. I think those two episodes, I think it was episode 99 and 100,
Yep,
and they were
that's
something.
episode 100 just crossed 1 million downloads, and it's the second
Well,
most downloaded one we have, other than
yeah.
Dirty Comms, which is just slightly higher. I think
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that episode is resonates so well?
I think NSO is kind of a lightning rod of and Pegasus of just the tech hacker space and stuff. The cybersecurity, because it's like, well, hold on, this is a stalkerware for sale, and
Mm,
it's being sold by a company, and it's not shut down like this. It's a strange endeavor, and I don't know, they kind of clearly come off as bad guys, and that's not always clear. Maybe I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a wild one. There's a
Are
lot
they
of other
bad
bad guy
guys?
ones,
Like,
but who
yeah.
knows?
Are they bad guys? It's a funny one that I left that episode thinking like, are these guys actually providing a service that's used for effectively a purpose that could be looked at as being good, or are they just fundamentally evil? And that's kind of how I left those two episodes, and that's probably the aim of it, right? That's the angle that you're trying to get at by telling the story as well.
Yeah, I leave it up to you on that one. It does sound like I mean, the implications, I think there's this shadowy group that
Yeah,
you start guessing at what the implications are here. And it's like, well, did they knowingly target this person or that? And if they didn't, then that means they don't have control over their own software. Like if they're, licensing their software to some country and then that country's doing it,
mm,
well, they don't really know who the targets are.
yeah,
But if they're the ones who have to do it and the country's like, here's who we want to target, and they know that they're targeting like, I don't know, a prince or a journalist. Like if you're hitting civil society, that's where the problems start happening.
yes,
You're attacking protesters, you're getting into journalists or something that isn't they aren't criminals, they aren't threats to the nation, they aren't anything that would be under national defense, but the government is not happy with them. And so now they're assisting corrupt governments. And you start to wonder where their moral line is. Are they just there to make money, or are they there to stop crime? And they'll
yeah,
say we're there to stop crime. That they've stopped all this terrorist attacks and stuff. But it's like, yeah, but what about this journalist here and this one here? Like Jamal Khashoggi's was
yes.
supposedly spied on by Pegasus, and this guy showed up assassinated, right? So
Mm.
did the Pegasus have
Duh.
some sort of play in determining where his whereabouts were in order to get him assassinated? And did the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia tell NSO to do this and all this kind of stuff? So you start guessing at all these things, and it becomes quite an interesting company just to say, "Whoa, this exists in the world." Like this is a modern. I get like future shock sometimes when I'm just like, I can't believe this stuff is going on,
Yeah,
and there's no one really there to stop them or say no to. You could sanction them, but it's still like in some other country, and it's really tricky.
yeah, and you've definitely been recently. I've noticed big on identity theft, privacy, and whatnot. And you know, do we? My thought process on this, I'm kind of like an accepting type of guy, and I go, look, we're in this world where the technology is so good. I mean, someone could be watching this stream live now, and we wouldn't really know about it effectively, right? Or on your phone. And I know people take a lot of precautions with their security, like you, right? Like you're obviously, not showing your identity, and that's interesting as well. But you do it for a particular reason. People know that. I interviewed one of our field CISOs at the company who slightly alters his images online so that they can't be used for any facial recognition fraud. So people are kind of getting into this world, but I'm probably too accepting of it, where I just kind of go, well, if someone wants to know what I'm doing, they probably can find out, right? So why kind of try and hide it? I mean, obviously you sit on the other side of that fence, but where do you think we are at that particular point? Banks can know everything about us. They know what we buy. They know our habits. Even shopping centers, they know what we're going to buy every morning. Every Wednesday, I get an email from or a message on my app with my local grocer. They know what I'm buying on a Wednesday morning because I've done it for the last 6 months. So where do you think we are with that?
Yeah, I don't like that at all. I mean, I don't know about Australian laws, but in the US, we have the Fourth Amendment, right? And so this is your
Yeah.
right to private your belongings and your papers and your property is supposed to be private unless the government gets a warrant to be able to search through your papers and
Mm,
and property. And there's not a lot of there. I mean, there's no warrants to this sort of thing, and so there's this thing called the third party doctrine that comes into play, which is, well, if you're willingly sharing your data with this company, then that doesn't need a warrant for us to get that data.
okay.
You already gave it to them, so we can just take it. And this is a kind of an issue, right? So you're using your credit card because some places only accept credit card; they don't accept cash. And so it's like, okay, I'll purchase something here, but now it's like, well, we have your your name and your address, and we know
Yeah.
everything, and we're going to share that because we can. And I don't like this. It's not. I think it's a violation of our privacy. I think it's a violation of maybe the Constitution. I think
Mm.
mass collection of data and mass spying does not have a warrant, and these are warrantless searches and a collection of data, and it does not make sense to me. It seems like a violation, and so I think that if I am not going to be the one who takes care of my own privacy, that no one else is, right? So companies
Yep.
aren't going to take my privacy seriously. The government's not going to take my privacy seriously. So it's now on me to do that, and I do a lot to do that. I try to use private apps and private secure chats and end-to-end encryption, and even a security phone. Like right now, I have Graphene OS as my phone because it's taken Google out entirely, and I'm very
Yeah,
restrictive
right.
on where my data is. And I think a lot of us are sharing our data with these companies, and that's where most of it gets out, right? So it's really
Yep.
on me to pull back and be like, oh, you need my phone number to sign up for this. Cool, no problem. I'll make a VoIP number and I'll give you that, and then I'll just like never check that number again. And I'm
Yep.
signed up for this service now. So I do a lot to get keep remain private online.
Yeah, keep a couple of steps ahead. And the funny part is, it only those sorts of um, the realization that your data is being kept at that level only happens sometimes if there's some sort of breach, right? Like there's been a couple of big ones that we've had in Australia with medical providers who basically there was an open API that wasn't authenticated correctly, and someone got in and basically was able to expose all the data, put it on the darknet, jump on the Thor router, and you're able to see it. And it's only then that you realize and how exposed we are. And I know a lot of people get outraged by that, but there's also a sense of inevitability that's just going to happen more and more, right? And we're going to finish a little bit on that threat landscape as well. I don't want to kind of preempt that too much. What I do want to talk about, and this is something that I alluded to at the beginning of the show, is a bit of a story because I think it leads itself well to the whole world of scamming. The time that I got scammed, and I haven't told this story ever because I'm embarrassed by it, right? So, in a
Mhm.
very short, sort of too long didn't read method of it, I was got really during the pandemic by the way, it's when I started listening to Darknet Diaries. I was also doing the heavy crypto stuff, the DeFi stuff, and the Solana chain. And actually, funny you talk about NFTs because I somehow sold an NFT of a picture that my daughter drew, which was like a little doggy, and I called them soul doggies. And I put them on this Solana version of OpenSea that was just booming, and someone bought it for like 5 Sol. And I was like, what the hell? And it was just, but I imagined it because it was at the opening and people were just like seagulls picking at whatever they could
Yeah.
at the time. And they were just buying it just because, oh, that looked like a dog. And, but if I showed you the picture, you'd go, how's that worth 1,000
Mhm.
US dollars? You know what I mean? But it was that type of time. So to the point about greed and just diving in human nature, I was like, I've got to get in this. And I got in it pretty hard. And I was part of a project with a friend of mine who I'd worked with previously. And I trusted this guy. And we were on Telegram. And the project was just starting and we were doing pretty well. And I got this message on a Friday afternoon saying, hey, Anthony, I need some money for a marketing payment that I need. I'll pay you back in a couple of hours, but I need like a $2,000 or $3,000. What have you got? So deep down, I knew that it was something was up. But it's like, it's him, like on Telegram. It's his
Mhm.
username. It looks like him. It's reading like him. Cool. Okay, it is him. So I reluctantly transferred money to this account. So
Mm.
around about 5,000 USD. And he said, cool, thank you. I will return the money in a little bit. And I'm like, cool, no worries. So a day passed and I'm like, okay, this is a bit strange now that I haven't heard from the guy. I went to my son's birthday. I remember this very vividly. And then I remember just thinking, this is not right. So I messaged the account back again. And all of a sudden, it basically came back with user not found. And straight away, my heart sank. Like I knew that I'd been scammed. And I was just like, how the hell could you have let yourself get scammed? You're in this world, you understand the risks. You talk about it with CXXs, and it was the most embarrassing moment of my life. And I've never talked about it before because I was just surprised that I got done. And then what happened afterwards is I learnt about the way that people can basically spoof accounts on Telegram almost with impunity, like with absolute impunity. And that Telegram was a cesspool for this sort of stuff. Um, What do you think about that? Because I know that there's the shame that I still carry about that. And I'll be honest with you, the actual guy that he was pretending to be, in his good heart, he actually looked after me and he actually refunded some of that money straight to me because he was felt so bad about me getting scammed, right? So it wasn't like I lost the money and did I really have it because it was crypto money as well. But what do you think about that story? Because I know the shame that I still carry with that.
Well, I think these are lessons we learn on the internet. I tried to buy something on eBay when I was young, and they canceled the auction and then messaged me directly saying, "Hey, I still have it. If you send me the money through Western Union, I'll send it to you." And I was like, "Cool." And so I sent $1,000 for this camera, and I never got it
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I was just a scammer the whole time. And so this has really kind of shaped me as well of like, okay, now as I go into every transaction online, let me double check that this is the right way to do it and on the in the right place. And so it kind of takes away your innocence as well of like, oh,
Yes.
I could just trust the people that I'm seeing here. No, you can't trust anybody. You need to verify this sort of thing. And so I bet, that was such a learning process for you that I bet it's going to be very difficult to scam you from here on out because you're very
Yeah.
aware of it can happen to anyone including you, and you should be extra careful, and you'll probably take extra steps now of anything like this, or be extra cautious, and
Yeah.
I think this helps us all. I think people have lost a lot more than what you lost, and I feel
Yeah.
a lot worse than you compared to you. So you may have gotten off easy with that, and I
I've
know
got
it
off
still could
very
be a
easy, I
lot.
reckon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it also is an ethical issue, or it's an interesting thing to try to tackle of whether or not your friend would give you the money because you were such a nice friend that if he asked you for $5,000, you're like, sure, here you go. And that has got to be such a sweet thing for him to hear, right? Just like, wow,
Yeah.
you would have given me that
That's true.
money. That is such a sweet thing to do. I can't believe you're that nice of a friend. I feel bad that I mean, I don't even know where the ethical line is there. Who's right to pay for it or whatever. And I don't think he needs
Absolutely.
to pay for it. But if it
No,
was an
he
impact
didn't.
to you, that I don't know. It's a wild thing, and that comes up in my head.
Well, like I guess to that extent, like I told this before we jumped on the recording, is that when you said that you'd be on the podcast, my actual first instinct was, is this the real Jack Rhysider? You know what I mean? Am I getting kind of punked here, right? And even the first Twitter DM, I was like, okay, is this really him? So you're right. It's absolutely made me more untrustworthy to a certain extent, or more wary about this world that we live in because people are just out to scam you, front and center all the time. And I think it's obviously a good lesson to learn. It's a good lesson for anyone listening out there, just to be extra cautious on that. Um,
Well,
and to the
to add
point,
on to
yeah,
sorry, to add on to
that's okay.
Telegram here for a minute. Well, first of all, I don't think Telegram is a secure messaging app. Now, it calls itself one,
Yeah,
and I don't agree. And I think there are a lot of
absolutely.
criminals who use it thinking it is, but it's definitely not. So by default, the chats you have on there are not end-to-end encrypted. Telegram, the company, can see these chats. You'd have to go to an extra step in order to encrypt it as to the way that they can't see it. But then all group chats are not end-to-end encrypted. And so Telegram can see inside all the chats there. And if they're calling themselves a secure messaging app, this sounds like false. I could call you out on that. That's not
Absolutely.
true.
Yeah.
And so there's
Yeah.
that. And yeah, it does flock a lot of, I don't know why it's such a popular thing for the hackers out there, but they absolutely are going crazy over it. And I get a lot of messages, right? Like I said, these teenagers are messaging me like, "Hey, can we talk on Telegram where it's safe?" And I'm like, you don't know anything."
It's the wrong
But
one,
but
man.
yeah,
Yeah.
so Signal is what I recommend. Signal is end-to-end
Yeah.
encrypted, even the group chats. And if you're messaging from one person to another, only you and them can see the message. Signal cannot see it. So if there's a subpoena to Signal, they can't look in there. The cops can't look in there. There's no way to look in there. And if Signal gets breached or hacked and all the data gets stolen, like you said, that's really eye-opening when it's a whole bunch of stuff that a company has on you. Signal wouldn't have any of that because it's encrypted and they don't have the key to show anybody. So go ahead,
That's
take
it.
as much as you want. That's just all gibberish. But the story
Yeah.
that I wanted to share was that recently I go on Telegram just to lurk, like to check into some of these circles and stuff, but not really to have a Jack Rhysider presence on there. But
Yeah.
recently, someone came to me from my Discord and said, "Hey, are you on Telegram? And is this your username at Jack Rhysider?" I was like, "No, I don't have Jack at Jack Rhysider." And so they're like,
Okay.
"Well, that person at Jack Rhysider just scammed me for $50,000. And are you
Okay. I
sure
don't
it's
feel
not
so bad
you?"
no more.
Yeah, so I was like, "Yeah, it's not me. I didn't do it." And so now I had to like take these allegations and figure out what to do about it. And so I go
Wow.
on Telegram and I'm like, "Hey, what's up? Who are you?" And he's like, "Oh, hi. How do I know you're the real Jack?" I said, "It doesn't matter if I'm the real Jack. What are you doing with this name? Because I know who the real Jack is, and I don't need to prove it to you." And so it turns out he's a fan of the show and he likes me and all this other thing. But I'm like, "You can't be scamming in my name because now I've got to deal with this crap and I'm busy. I got stuff to do. I don't want to be trying to deal with allegations against me because you're scamming in my name." And
Was this
so
his
we've
way of getting
had
on the show? Was this his way of trying to prove that he is good enough to be on the show and here's a
no, so
story
he's
to be
like,
told?
"Listen, let's go in halves. I'll give you a percentage of the stuff I'm
Oh
scamming."
my
I'm like,
God.
"No, it's
Yeah.
not gonna work like that." So I had to tweet the other day, like, I don't own these accounts because somebody on Telegram is using my name there and I can't do anything about it.
Oh man, that's crazy. That's wild. Hey, and do you know what? So what I actually do, and I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do, but I absolutely do get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Now that I know and can recognize a scammer, like even on WhatsApp when they come through, like the scam girlfriends that come through and trying to say, hey, what are you doing? Like and trying to sort of get you from that love
Mm-hmm.
perspective. I won't, for the most part, depending on how busy I am, I'll actually ride with it for a while. And because I know that if I'm wasting their time, if I'm taking 10, 20, an hour of their time, I know that's time they're not scamming other people, right? So
Yeah.
I take great pleasure in doing that actually. And obviously that's what Jim Hates Scams has made a whole career out of and a popular show out of, right? Is kind of riding that to the extreme. But even in that little period, if I can grab them and try and say that I'm going to do it all, transfer the money, I'll do this. And if I can take 30 minutes of their time, that's awesome for me. And then at the
Mm-hmm.
end, I use some very colourful Aussie vernacular language, which we're very popular for. And I just basically tell them how much of a low life dog they are trying to scam people, right? So most people just basically say fuck you and I'll move on to the next. But some people go, why are you being so mean? Why are you using that language? It's well you're trying to scam people out of their money, man. And
Yeah.
I get a great sense of accomplishment out of that. Maybe too much, I don't know. All right, last thing. And we've kind of it flows on very nicely. We're entering into a really confronting slash exciting time with all the technology that exists today in the world, specifically around generative AI technology. Right, the landscape's just fundamentally accelerated and changed over the last 12 months, and you've touched on it on a few of your previous episodes around the sophistication of modern scams and the attacks that are happening are just getting more and more real to the point where you almost can't tell if the person you're talking to is who it is, right? Where do you see that going? Because I know you've got like the good intentions of humanity, and you think it's going to be all positive for humanity and we're going to accelerate. And I feel that as well. I feel like technology will take us to great places and I'm really excited for it. But on the flip side, I'm kind of scared about this sort of technology coming out. So where does Jack Rhysider see that in the now and versus where it's going to be in a couple of years?
Yeah, I think I always default to just trying to be an optimist. And, when you're an optimist, you could be in a terrible situation that you can say, well, there's nothing positive here. And if you could just change your mindset and be like, well, if I can't change the situation, I could change my mindset. And if I could change my mindset, then I can do something positive with this situation, right? So I can't change the tech landscape, but I can change how I view the tech landscape. And if I view it in a positive way, then, hey, I'm going to be able to um, I don't know, have more fun with it, and have more exciting, right? And so I think tech is really going to improve us in a big way. Like just if you think about playing chess against somebody who has a computer available, right? So like a
Yeah,
human versus a person with a computer, the person with
yeah.
a computer is going to be a million times better at chess player. It doesn't matter which person on the planet. So the ability for computers to help us in this massive way for specific tasks is incredible. It's like no question, you should want this on your side to do whatever it is you're doing, because it's just a million times better compared to just you trying it with nothing. And so that's
I,
where I'm like, okay, I got an ally. I got to be an ally with this whole computer
yeah.
thing to keep it on my side and to use it as a tool in my world. But yes, as far as s- people getting fake phone calls or video calls or whatever, and it's not being really them, that is an interesting thing. So I just think that the technology that's coming out today is definitely giving us or giving people new weapons to use to attack with. But I think
Mhm.
at the same time, the technology also gives ability to detect those weapons or defend
Yes.
against that, right? So when you
Yeah.
have, I think when when ChatGPT first came on my radar, people were using it to identify bugs in smart contracts on the blockchain, and
Hmm.
that could be used to make millions of dollars with, because like, oh my gosh, there's this bug. And so
Oh
with
man,
that,
smart people again. Damn it.
yeah, like
Miss out.
like very quickly after that, I was seeing things like Copilot get created, and Copilot is there to help you create code. And I was like, well, I sure hope the first thing Copilot does is look over your shoulders, look for bugs, and help you create secure code. It does some of that. It's not quite the primary thing it's there for,
No.
but I think this is probably where we need to be, working together, right? So it's developing the security tools as fast or faster than developing the weapons to exploit those tools. And there's
Yeah.
always this going to be, I don't know, an arms race in some way of who's going to develop the next exploit, and then how do we detect that and figure out a way to defend against it. And I think it just goes back and forth just naturally over the last few decades, of course, and
Yeah.
we're still in that kind of space. So how can you detect deep fake or AI voice when you think, oh, that's my mom on the phone, or if your mom getting a call thinking it's you on the phone, but it's not you, it's a
Yeah.
scammer.
Yeah.
I think we should put captchas in the phone. So it's like,
You
okay,
mentioned you
mom,
mentioned that, yeah.
before you before you connect, we got to solve this captcha. No, I
Some
think,
sort, yeah. Or
yeah,
you talked about like a sort of certificate transfer or something like that, some sort of digital identity to make sure that there's something that passes between the video chat to make sure that it is you. So we're basically talking about SSL certificates for video, effectively, or something like
hmm
that.
yeah, there could be
But
some sort of there's identity mechanism that we'll have to adopt going forward. Like if I have control over this identity, then that's connected to this phone number or whatever, and then I know that you had that, right? So yeah, I think we can probably work with something like that. And then initially getting that identity set up is interesting. I don't know, it then comes back to, wait a minute, there's this digital privacy stuff that I'm concerned of. I don't want
yeah,
like some
yeah,
government issued identity saying this is yours that you have to use online everywhere you go. Very similar to maybe how India does things. That's tricky. Because I don't want my real identity linked to all my purchases or all the things I'm saying online. Yeah,
yeah.
it
It's
becomes really tricky.
You're talking about basically two worlds colliding effectively there, like, and how much of one does the other one impact, and vice versa. How much do you give away? That's the trick of it. And I've used the terminology like the pointy end of the stick is getting pointier with regards to the level of the threat landscape and what we're doing. I mean, I was doing some research a couple of weeks ago, and on the dark web, if you can connect to a Thor router, and you'll be able to buy an unguarded or an unprotected version of ChatGPT, WormGPT, which will create the malware code for you, right? And you can pay 70 euros, and basically you've got the capability to create a bit of code that's going to do some nasty stuff to a business if you want, right? So it's not these big groups that are able to do that anymore. If someone's got the inclination to try and be a bit greedy and make money, they can pay 70 euros and have the capability right there and get something pretty good out of it, right? And be able to potentially succeed.
Hmm. Yeah.
Cool.
There's a there's a real threat that's like having, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a technology that just had no value. Right? It was just dangerous, like Agent Orange, maybe. I don't know, like some terrible nerve gas that just had no no positive value, right? If everyone had this ability to just drum it up in their living room and say, here we go, we can all create this. How safe is that world? Is it just a matter of time before somebody leashes it on the city or the state or whatever, that is probably true. And so how do we combat against having the wrong information out there? That is a very tricky bit, and it then it starts competing against free speech and what's available and
Yeah.
what needs to be shushed up and who's the one controlling the shush, and it's a very difficult world, and so it's very exciting to kind of see what's going on out there. And yeah, like I said, I think each time one side gets ratcheted up, the other side is going to be able to ratchet up as well. Like I think it's probably the same with if there's post quantum quick cryptography is going on now,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
quantum I mean the idea here, which I kind of understand a little bit more about it and think the idea is silly, but an idea of there being, all encryption being destroyed once a quantum computer gets loose, then well, now all encryption is destroyed. Um,
We got to
well,
start again
yeah, but now you've
at
got a
that point.
quantum computer that can make new kinds of encryption, and so it
Yeah.
could do something that maybe it couldn't.
We're just
That
stepping it. We're just stepping ahead, aren't we? And I think that's the end all of this technology game. There's an acceleration happening. Um, we can use it for good and evil. It's just a race, and in that you get great stories as well. To be fair, so you can for the near future, you're going to continue to have some really good stories on Darknet Diaries. But hey, I think that's a good point to wrap up. It's been a great chat. We've gone through some different areas. We've talked about how you started the company, because it is a company and that's the whole point of this. And you've built yourself on great technology, which is what we're about. So, hey, Jack, I really appreciate you being on. I just say thanks. And I hope a lot of people got out some new stuff. And this is episode 83 of Great Things with Great Tech. This has been Jack Rhysider, and thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun being here.
Awesome.